What's poppin', people? It's Dante walking along the Schuylkill River here in Philadelphia, and today I'm thinking about composition. And my thought today is composition is physical. And what does that mean, and why do I think this way? And so I'm specifically referencing composition in terms of street photography. However, of course, we can consider composition in terms of all visual arts and mediums, whether it's you know, painting, drawing, even sculpture, right? There's different ways that you can look at something and consider it as a composition. You know, when you look at a beautiful church and the layout of the architecture, the different columns, archways, etc., there's a composition to the structure. And if you look at the word composition, com meaning together, position meaning to place, right? Essentially, a composition is where we place things together. And as a photographer who's working in physical embodied reality, I believe that composition is physical, you know, as it is required for us as photographers to physically engage with the world when we're creating our images. We're not sitting back making a composition with a paintbrush or a pencil, but we're actually out there in the world responding to what's in front of us. And in order to synthesize the foreground, the middle ground, the background in a composition, you know, when you consider this, you might think of layering, right? This technique of layering in photography, I personally believe, is the foundation and the fundamentals of how to create a more dynamic photograph that synthesizes not only the content within your frame, the moment, the subject, the human element, but also the formalities of light, of, you know, the dynamics of lines, of the structure and formal elements that makes a composition strong, whether it's the geometry and the sort of other different little intricacies and formalities that make something visually striking. You can consider these the graphic elements. And so I believe ultimately a photographer is responsible for where they position their physical body in relationship to the subject and the background, meaning it's up to you and the way that you position your physical body and click the shutter that creates the composition. And why is it important for me to think about it this way, very practically and simply? Because I believe that it is so. You know, I personally believe that every scene that you you know, embark on to photograph, like I could look at the couple here sitting in these two chairs, or the unfolding of the blanket there with the bike coming by, you know, how to relate my physical body in relationship to that moment, that subject in the background, to create something visually striking. It's actually really simple, right? Like, for instance, we have somebody walking along in the foreground of the plane. There's, now I'm noticing a boat there in the background, right? And now we have the two people seated here. Now we had a foreground, middle ground, background. You know, if I were to photograph from eye level here, unfortunately the subjects would be lost in the greenery of the plane here in the grass. However, if I drop low, you can clearly see the outline of their silhouette against the river, adding contrast and form to the subject. And I think when you look at the world in front of you as a visual puzzle for you to solve, it's very easy for you to then understand fundamentally where you must physically position yourself in relationship to whatever you're trying to photograph to create a strong composition. Once again, it's very physical. Composition is physical, and the result of the photograph, I believe, derives from your gut, from your intuition. And so as much as composition is physical, we have to recognize when you're physically positioning your body that it's a gut instinct. It's a feeling that you have through your intuition to then press the shutter. And so when you position your physical body in relationship to the world and the moments around you and click the shutter, you're not only creating a composition in that fraction of a second, but you're synthesizing your ability to physically be engaged with your intuitive gut-like feeling to click the shutter and create, where it's not a very it's not this rational thing that you're like, you know, like I'm explaining to you how I'm looking at the world like a visual puzzle, but that doesn't mean that I'm in my head, you know, looking at the world with leading lines. I'm just naturally looking at the way things fall together upon the plane, upon the canvas that is our world. Like I was looking at the person on the path in the foreground, then the people sitting in the middle ground, the boat coming together in the background. And then you start to look at the world this way, and then you relate these things through the physicality of you moving your body, positioning yourself and then synthesizing these different elements through intuition. And that's what wraps together the composition. It's the physical nature of life and the way that you carry yourself as a photographer combined with that gut instinct, that intuition to click the shutter. And once again, I believe truly that there is a sweet spot in every scene that you can possibly see. And of course, you know, there's a million different ways that you can articulate things. There's a million different ways you can make a photograph of the same scene, of the same person, the same moment, etc. But in terms of finding the sweet spot, I would encourage you, when you're looking at life and you're observing people and moments as a photographer, to think more so about where you must physically position yourself to find that sweet spot. And the more you recognize that sweet spot, the more that you find yourself positioning yourself at the right place at the right time and responding with your gut, the more success you'll have of creating a more dynamic composition. And so these are just some candid thoughts about composition. It's on my mind. I'm very passionate about photography, obviously, and I think that there are some fundamental ideas that we can put in our tool belt just to have in the back of our head, some simple thoughts, some simple ideas. Of course, you got to put this in practice. You know, there's no amount of theory, of information and understanding through words that can convey this. But when you're out there and you're photographing, think about this for a second and try to understand how you can put it into practice. Because philosophy is one thing, but practice is another, right? And so I believe in lived practice and lived philosophy, right? Where you go out there and you actually practice the thing itself. And so, you know, I've been shooting for a decade straight and I've been putting these ideas into practice, and they surely have paid off, where I found that through years of repetition, consistency, and discipline, I've been able to cultivate this ability to pretty much articulate anything, any situation that I find myself in, no matter how chaotic it may be. If I'm on a busy, bustling street or on a beach like the other day at Coney Island on the 4th of July, I'm gonna find a way for me to create something. I'm gonna find a way for me to put myself in the right position to bring everything together in a composition. And you know, that to me is the art of photography. I believe that it's a very simple medium, but it requires you to really recognize the physicality of what this is. It's a very physical medium. You know, it's as much as it's a visual, you know, game of putting together the foreground, middle ground, background, photography is a physical pleasure of you walking, dropping low, of moving to the left, moving to the right, and then putting together these different elements to create a photograph, right? It's a very physical act, you know? And so I believe that photography is physical, composition is physical, and as much as we can see and perceive like the composition in our head and look at things this way with our eyes, you know, that are connected to our brain, that allow us to like scan things visually and rationally, the result of the composition should be, I believe, something that derives in the gut, that instinct, once again, to press the shutter. That's where the sweet spot is. That's where that sort of beauty lies. It's in the spontaneous nature of life. It's in that reaction of you simply responding intuitively and not thinking too much visually, but just physically positioning yourself in relationship to the subject and the background at that fraction of a second where your gut instinct finds the sweet spot and tells your brain to then press the shutter, right? It's all from the gut translating up to the brain to click the shutter, right? Photography isn't something that requires brains whatsoever. It requires instinct. It requires you to have an intuition. And so, yeah, it's a very physical act. For instance, making a photograph of that couple there laying down, sunbathing. I could make a picture from a low angle, but they would simply wash out across the green. If I rose my camera like I just did, you can clearly see them outlined against this sort of background, and you can see their skin across the frame. And it was a simple compositional decision, considering they're lying down in that position. For me as a photographer, to photograph from eye level, you wouldn't see anything. But because I raised the camera above the subjects and photographed from a top-down angle, I then made something a little bit more visually pleasing for the viewer's eye. And you know, it's a poor example to just randomly show at the end of this video, but I think maybe it's a good example to just end off on, where you should tinker more and play more with your physical position, where you position your camera, how you position your body, where you're dropping low, you're moving left, you're moving right, and maybe everything will turn out all right. Yeah, photography is very simple. It's a visual game, but it's a physical pleasure. And the result of the composition, it's a reflection of your intuition and your body and where it's physically positioned in relationship to the subject and the background, and that's it. And that's the only idea that you really should even have in your head when it comes to composition. All the other stuff like rule of thirds, leading lines, vanishing points, frames within a frame, you know, all of this sort of junk food for the brain isn't necessary for you to have in your mind. All you really need to understand is that very simple fundamental idea that composition is physical, and then everything else will fall into place naturally. And so yeah, hopefully some of these ideas help you with your photography, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. It's kind of loud here too, sorry, but I was on the Kelly Drive. I usually walk in the woods and stuff, but this is where I happen to be. Yeah, the beautiful view though. Now it's quiet. Okay. Kelly Drive is busy. But that's the thing, keep it raw, keep it uncut, keep it candid, noise in the background, whatever. Same thing with your photography. It can become a little bit sloppy, a little bit topsy-turvy. Things might overlap, things might not be so perfect, but that's the beauty of composition. It's physical, it's intuition.